Welcome to the Uprising Show. And today I have a very special guest, Jake. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much.
So, Jake, let's start with your brief intro before we go into the conversation.
Yeah, I'm Jake Kantrowitz. I'm an internal medicine physician. I'm an entrepreneur, a co-founder of River Records. I'm a husband, father, bread baker. Maybe not professionally, but pretty good. And I'm just happy to be here.
We are excited to have you. So, Jake, let's rewind back to your time. And what kind of kid were you growing up at Milton Academy? And were there early signs even then that you would be drawn to both medicine and tech back then? So talk to us about that.
Yeah, happy to. I went to Milton Academy for high school. Felt very lucky to go there. When I found out that there was computer science on offering, I jumped at the opportunity and learned Java. And kind of just haven't stopped looking at computer science while simultaneously doing more biological sciences throughout my academic career. And so just felt very lucky to have essentially been exposed to computer science at a young age, because I think without that opportunity, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing today. And I like what I'm doing today.
And you still decided to go for medicine then? Well, what was the deal? Why not software engineering at that time?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say I have always enjoyed the biological sciences, and I thought that something to do that could be helpful to other people is to become a doctor. I think I had some family members who are in medicine and dentistry, and I think that always motivated me. They seemed like they had a good job. They were happy. They were contributing to their community. And I think medicine is something that very obviously, I think, and in a sort of first principles kind of way, gives back to the people that are around you. And I think that's important. That's something I grew up feeling was important. And medicine, I think, just does that by its existence and by its very nature.
Awesome. And you said either of your parents were a physician?
My uncle was a physician, and my stepfather is a dentist, both retired.
Nice. So you had some people around you in that field. That's the exposure.
Really.
So you are obviously trained as a physician and a scientist, but if you had to define yourself outside of your job title, you mentioned a few things briefly in your intro.
Yeah.
Who is Jacob Kantrowitz at its core?
Yeah. So I gave some of the titles, some of the hats that I wear, right? I'm a dad of two kids. I'm a husband to a wonderful partner. But I think my personality, my sort of inner self, is someone who I like to understand details. I'm very focused on sort of like systems levels as well, just understanding the systems that I exist in and trying to sort of understand why things are the way they are and to see if there are ways to improve things. But more to just understand. I like to be able to follow the logic of the things that are happening to me. I'm a deeply flawed person. If I don't get those details, I can get frustrated. I think just like anybody else. But I like to understand what's going on at a fairly deep level, I think.
Got it. And obviously now fast forward to your company, you co-founded River Records, and while still practicing medicine. So take us to the exact moment you decided, like, I have to build this myself. No one is solving this problem. So go back. What was that moment? What was the problem? And then give us more insight into what River Records is doing.
Sure. So I did my PhD and my MD as a combined program at Boston University. And when I finished my PhD, I went back to the last 2 years of medical school, and I met my now co-founders, Jackson Steinkamp and Abhinav Sharma and Wasif Bala. Wasif has since left the company for nothing to do with the company, just what he wanted to do with his time. But the remaining three founders, and sort of as a group originally, this was back in like 2018, we were medical students, and we were spending a lot of our time in medical school learning how to do what's called a chart biopsy, where you go into the medical record and you find information that's related to the problem that you're seeing the patient for today, right? If the patient's in the emergency room and they have chest pain, you've got to go back and read through and see all the instances of chest pain that they've had. You can do like a search in most health records, though not all health records have search functionality, which I find shocking in 2025. And then you can kind of collate the record as you need to identify sort of the potential sort of sets of the differential, the etiology of the patient's chest pain that particular day, whether it's reflux or anxiety, or they're having a heart attack or something of this nature. But we spend a lot of time doing this as physicians. Just like an insane amount of time is spent reconstructing patients' histories. And so we, as medical students, were then tasked with writing some documentation. We started, as med students, you have to write a discharge summary. You've got to learn how to write the sort of hospital course from what's happened from the patient's admission up through the moment they leave the hospital. And you've got to provide clear instructions to the next clinician who's going to be taking care of them. And that task in itself is just a chart biopsy. It's like, okay, well, why did they present to the emergency room? What happened to them while they were here? And now what are they doing sort of before they're discharged, and where are they going to go from here? It's just text summarization, but it's very painful. And so we set out sort of as a research project saying, could we automate this process? I would say now that is very technically feasible. And in 2018, it was technically feasible, but it was very difficult to do. There were no large language models that were really existing, and certainly not in production or ready for anything clinical. And so we identified, I think at the time, 26 different kinds of clinical information that needed to be extracted from the health record and then would need to be summarized. And we started doing this from a research perspective, and we got through one kind of these 26 different kinds of data. We got through one. We said we can extract symptom mentions from health records using natural language processing. We published a paper, we went to a conference, presented it, and it was frankly, it was surprisingly well received, given that we were medical students at a sort of, attending level conference for, it was one of the AMIA conferences. But we said, if we really want to tackle this problem, it can't be done through research. Research, I had just finished my PhD, like I said, and research is wonderful, is super important to the improvement and the pushing forward of medicine as a field, but it doesn't, without the sort of entrepreneurship piece, it doesn't get into practice. And I really wanted to say, like, no, we need to fix this particular kind of process. We need to fix this automation piece, and it needs to be done at a company level. And so that's when we founded River Records. It was in 2018, I think, or 2019. We worked on a few related projects around information management, and it's kind of evolved over the last few years.
Very interesting. And it's what stage of the company, or how big is the company? How many employees? And talk to us about where you are.
Yeah, so we have 5 physicians involved. We have one of whom is our CTO and one of our developers. We have 2 other developers involved. We have a business advisor, and we've sort of gotten other various fractional resources kind of as we've needed them. We're still, I would say, in the startup phase of things. We have active clients, absolutely, who love the product that we're offering. And we're on the sort of hope to be successful growth trajectory. It's a startup. Many of these companies kind of, many companies fail at this stage. I think we are persistent, and we see a real problem with the way that electronic information in medicine is organized, which is really the problem that we're trying to solve.
And it's a complex area, just to based on my experience, and especially in health tech world. When you touch HR part of the business, it's probably the most complex today, right? So not only the value that you're bringing, it's also complex in terms of go to market, right? Like it's almost like hard to move. And then there is so within that segment, are you targeting more of private practice space, or is it more of health system? Who's your target?
Yeah. No, that's a great question. I think really important to figure out at an early stage company where you can sell. I've seen lots of companies, and I've talked to other co-founders who've said, oh, well, we're trying to integrate with Epic and we want to go sell to these big shops. And it's like, you're a startup. These health systems don't care what incredible tool you're offering if you aren't yet proven on the ground with smaller groups, they're not going to talk to you. Like, they're certainly not going to buy from you, but they're definitely not going to talk to you. So at this point, we primarily are focused on private physician groups, one clinician up through, 20 or 30. I'm happy to work with bigger groups, but I like working with physician or clinician. We work with a lot of NPs as well. I like working with clinicians who get to make their own purchasing decisions, because if they see value in something, they can say, yes, I'm going to buy that. I'm going to use that, versus working with a health system where there's like a CIO or a CMIO, or a CTO who maybe has to make these choices and has to consider a lot of other pieces, as opposed to just, does it make sense for me clinically? Right. And so I'm not asking for multi-million dollars. I'm asking for like $149 a month, for one user. And that's a much easier sell to a private group than it is to a much larger health system. And while we're getting our feet wet and sort of like, getting into the river a little bit of the health systems, I think it makes a lot more sense to start small.
I always seen kind of like two parallels of go to market, and especially in these segments. From my experience, it's two routes. One is like you go how you're doing it, and another one is you work with hospitals. Those have venture arms, and they get you to one department and let you do a pilot, and that becomes kind of your case study from there on. The challenge, however, is, or whatever good in this approach is, what you're doing, it's a slightly difficult approach, but it's also better, just because in those models, once you get ditched from the hospital, you're done. Yeah, your go to market goes for it's done. You have no other clients, and that's the biggest challenge. In this case, you're doing the hard way. You're going, I like to call it like, it's a bottoms up approach rather than top down. And then, but once you acquire these multiple physician or providers, then that helps build more resiliency on your go to market model.
Yeah. No, for sure. And I think if you end up relying on one hospital system to sort of vet your product, you will, in my mind, it's much harder to actually succeed that way, because then you've just tailored your approach to one system and one group of clinicians. And the thing that I feel frankly privileged to have learned at this point in the work that we're doing is that every clinician works differently, and especially across states, and at least within the United States, right? Across practice types and experience and the size of the practices and just the workflows. Everyone has come up with their own way of practicing medicine, and to be able to support people in different specialties in different states at different states of training, I think is really important. And if I were just to go work with like the primary care department at like one of the hospitals in Boston, where I live, I don't think it would expand naturally or extend or generalize really to other workflows. And I think what we're trying to do is build a tool or set of tools that generalize well and really solve an information management problem that clinicians experience that is not unique to one hospital or one practice.
Yeah. And we talked about this is a complex area to build tech there in this, anything touching EHR in and around it. So what are some hidden challenges you have faced that most people outside health tech probably won't even understand? Talk to me about that.
Yeah, I think people always assume that like the HIPAA compliance piece or something will be like, it has to be HIPAA compliant. I'm like, that's actually not that hard. It's just technology. You need to put in place some pretty standard security encryption to like make sure that your data is secure. That's not the hard thing in medicine. In my mind, the hard thing in medicine, and I feel kind of privileged to be in a space where I can use the tool and kind of understand clinically what it is that needs to happen. But the thing that's tricky in medicine is the volume and the speed and the complexity of the decisions that are made in everyone's workflows, and how everyone, like I said, everyone practices differently. And so building tools that actually generalize and don't slow clinicians down, don't make them feel like they're missing things, don't make them feel like they've done something bad or dangerous for their patients. That's really the hard piece, right? Most clinicians at this point have figured out, if not 100% of, right, probably 100% of practicing clinicians have figured out a set of workflows that get them from the beginning of their day to the end of their day in a way that they feel comfortable and that they can sleep at night, which is something that we often talk about in medicine. Is if you've left something that is, you're not, it's kind of nagging at the back of your brain. You're like, I didn't, this thing that's, I talked to this patient about, I'm not quite sure I did it right. That stuff keeps you up at night, and trying to insert yourself into those workflows where they've figured out how to get from A to B from the beginning to the end of their day and they can sleep at night. Inserting yourself in that space is really hard because you have to do it in a way that is not that disruptive and gives them immediate benefit. And so, part of the tool that we offer is an ambient note writer. And the reason that those tools are so productive and so, have made such headway in medicine is because they insert themselves in a very natural way into the workflows and then produce something at the end of the encounter that resembles very close to what the physician would have generated themselves, right? And there's some data at this point that like 60 to 70% of clinicians will use these tools like 60 to 70% of the time. And I think it's just that figuring out how to give that benefit quickly in a safe way that's reproducible, that's really hard. And clinicians are very skeptical of trying new things because their workflows are good enough. And in medicine and in quality improvement and change management, I think we often have to rely on letting good enough be enough, right? We don't need to be perfect. There's like a saying, don't let perfect be the enemy of good enough. I think in these kinds of tools, that is where we need to be. The note that I produce, the information that I produce, it doesn't need to be perfect at the end of the day. It needs to be better than the status quo, in a way that's reproducible and consistent, and the physician sees benefit quickly. And if it's too difficult to do those things, people are going to walk away.
And you are using natural language processing to organize the historical patient records. So how did you, I guess, first realize the thinking, the old traditional EMR thinking is broken and this needs to be done in this way? So walk us through that, and then also touch upon exactly how this works. This is also kind of almost like also similar to AI Scribe, where it's also listening and taking notes, or how exactly that works. That part, also explain us that.
Yeah. So part of this work goes back to our initial idea of automating a discharge summary, and so that was one of the projects that we worked on. One of the projects we worked on was identifying, using natural language processing again, and not using image recognition, but using NLP. We read through radiology reports and we said, how can we identify the incidental findings that require follow-up? And these two projects are very different in sort of their application. But what we realized in both was that clinical information in text was getting lost and then needing to be recovered. And so that's sort of the motivation for a lot of our work, is to make sure that information doesn't get lost. And there's this great paper from, I was just looking for it. There's this great paper from Beasley et al. I think it's like 2009. Might be a little bit later, but it's about information chaos in primary care. And it talks about the like dangers of information management, of information chaos, which is not explicitly a medicine problem, but it's sort of this paper applies it to the arena of primary care, and says that there's this issue of like information scatter, duplication, overload, all kinds of different things. And scatter in particular means that information about one particular medical problem might be strewn about sort of the health record, right? The discharge summary is a great example. If the patient's in the hospital for 10 days, there's not less than 10 different notes that I have to go review to put together the history of the medical problem that the patient was admitted for, whether it was pneumonia or a heart attack or some kind of surgery or what have you. And right at the end of the day, I'm just going to the bottom of the note, looking for the assessment and plan, trying to understand sort of like what happened over the 10 days. And if we, instead of writing notes that were encounter based, that were time based, yes, you have to sort of store the time. Chronology is obviously critical in medicine. But if you had to reorganize these things, most clinicians, I think, would agree that information that we want to find in a focused, problem oriented way. And I'm not looking for the note from 3 days ago. I'm looking for the last time that hypertension was updated. Right. And so flipping that sort of on its head, it's like, well, how can you reorganize the record to reflect that clinical thinking and not just who wrote the note, when was it written, and like what service did they work on? Right. I don't care if it was written by John in the internal medicine service 3 days ago. I want to know that this is the last time the problem was addressed. And so we really built a system that kind of flips it a little bit on its head and says, no, we should store everything by problem. And then after that, yes, it obviously still needs to be stored by who wrote the information, where's the provenance of the data, and yes, what day was it written on, or what time was it written at? And so it was really just thinking clinically about what it is that I need. How do I review information? And not just how is it written and sort of initially captured.
So, also, I want to touch the second part of my question. So, now, is it also more of like a AI scribe, which also kind of running at times, taking the notes as well? Is that part also covered in this, or is it more once the notes are done, then the processing and converting into problem oriented charting from there? Where exactly you fit, or both?
It's both.
Okay.
So we said, well, we want to be able to reorganize the historical record so that we can move forward with a clean chart. And then simultaneously, anytime you, the clinician who is using our product's called Stream, anytime you're using Stream, we want you to capture information and organize it up front without needing to then reorganize it later. Because I'd rather have a human in the loop at the moment the data is captured and organized to say, yes, this is how the data should be organized, and then save that into sort of this clean record.
Got it. It's it totally makes sense, right? In that way, like the evolution of how EHR has been. First, it's just like a system of records. So we all want who got, who did what. Let's make sure, note it down. It's there. But again, it doesn't make sense, like how you said, for the clinicians, because that's kind of like administrative information. Great. We should know that. We should capture it. But at the end of the day, we need more clinical insights on what has happened. And then from there on, you want to then take next steps, right? In your, whatever care journey the patient is having, you're able to make better decisions at that time. So it feels like, now I'm kind of questioning why it does not exist, but it's almost like, yeah, it should be, right? Like that's how it should be. So that's that. But, given that, it's all, AI and stuff is coming, and I'm sure traditional or conventional EHR companies are also going to pick up the same things, right? Like the AI capabilities. So, where is like the sweet spot? Is it like, can all these traditional EHR companies who also have all this, and can they build AI features on top of it to make that information more, let's say, in your words, problem oriented charting in that way? And then, I guess then what is the difference between your product and the existing one? Can you shed some light on that?
No, I think that's a great question. Right. And I would say some of the larger health records currently, I would say most of them offer some form of problem oriented charting. The issue with those is that it is almost designed as an afterthought, right? With meaningful use, they were sort of forced to have a problem list, and they were forced to make documentation available, and they were forced to have computer assisted, like physician order, electronic, computer based physician order entry. Right. So they sort of put all of those things in, but without thought to how they should operate together and how the record should evolve over time. And so now in many health records, the problem-oriented nature of charting actually exacerbates information scatter in my mind, because sometimes information is charted in this very nice problem-oriented way by some clinicians, but some clinicians, if there's too many clicks involved, will just, in their note, free text the various problems. They'll number them, problem 1, problem 2, problem 3, or they'll do hashtags for hypertension, hyperlipidemia, diabetes, and they won't then put them into the problem-oriented nature. And so now I have to still, even with the problem-oriented charting available, I still have to just go back note through note and reconstruct the history in a sort of comprehensive way if I need to do that. And I'm sure, right, I know that some of the larger health record systems are building more towards problem-oriented charting in like more intuitive ways. But I think the very nature of electronic records at this point is to be a reflection of an electronic filing cabinet, right? The way that data is stored and retrieved is by encounter and by data type, right? So the tabs that exist in the electronic records are for labs, imaging, and for documentation, right? Like those are and medications. And then there's maybe an overview. But even just that being the primary way that people retrieve information is, in my mind, the wrong way, right? Each of those orders, each of those notes has problems attached to them. The notes have diagnoses that were addressed. The lab orders have reasons that they were ordered. The image is the same. Without flipping that on its head entirely, it's very difficult to reorganize the way that information is retrieved. And really all we're talking about is reorganizing how information is stored so that it can be retrieved better, right? EHRs do a very good job of capturing data. They're very good filing cabinets, but that's what they're really good at this point. They are big databases with, I would say, fairly unintuitive user interfaces and user experience that's pretty terrible for most of the clinical work that needs to be done. And so we have reconceptualized sort of like what data capture should look like at the front end, and then how information should be retrieved when it needs to be retrieved. And I think, yes, I think it's possible that large health records can do this, but I think it's a pretty big departure from the way they've operated since their inception in like the 1980s.
So I'm going to give a strong yes to all that you explained for a couple of reasons. One is like, we have seen this exact play out in the practice management software or patient engagement space because of how complex it is for traditional EHRs to even restructure everything. It becomes like a software engineering problem combined with information management problem together, and it's just not possible for them to. And they have failed. I mean, it's shown. Yeah, even before you, right? They have failed. That's why the whole market of practice management systems or patient engagement software emerged, and then they found a place to exist in this ecosystem just because EHRs were started as databases and they just failed to then, it's kind of like afterthought. Everything you build after it is just a layer over it, and it doesn't come with that kind of sophistication to build that kind of nuances that you're looking for, even to the level that they failed to that level that the reminders and all that stuff were built as separate part of PMS systems. At the communication side of patient, all the stuff happened outside of the database. So it still became more of data capturing. So I like what you're doing. To my second point is, it's kind of now you, instead of going this route of like, okay, we figured it out, the patient engagement, relationship, and communication piece through all these systems exist, and they attach to the EHR externally or internally. Sometimes it's part of this, but now we need to rethink also from the clinician workflow side. Let's make sure the record keeping is taught again, and like again, how you said it, problem oriented charting, to now make sure that it helps the clinicians, because we passed that era where first of all capturing information was a problem. Now we got past, now the information is getting captured. That's great. Now the next step is now it's too much information for the clinicians to process it. So now how do we solve this problem to move to the next phase, which is like make it so that it's clear to the physician or clinicians to what is in the history of the chart, where the next care or decision needs to go from there on. So is that the right,
Yeah.
would you agree with that analysis here?
Yeah. I think the last thing that you said in particular rings true, where we've gotten really good at capturing the data, and that's great. That's the first step. But at this point, the best way to tell whether someone is sick in the hospital isn't to read anything. It's to look at how many notes have been generated around their care. Right? If someone has a bunch of notes written, you're like, oh, that person must be really sick. And that means that like the communication that we're trying to do in the documentation is failing. Right? It's too hard to go find a quick summary of what's going on or a high level understanding of the patients that we're caring for, such that people don't use the electronic health record for communication. They're like, oh, we have this texting app. Or I know a lot of attendings in the past in particular who have emailed summaries when they're doing handoffs. They're like, you don't go read the chart. Here's a summary of the patient. I'll just email it to you. Because that level of communication is easier than saying, go read the chart. When someone tells me, one of my favorite sort of like pet peeves, I guess, that patients do is I ask them questions when I meet them for the first time and they say, oh, well, it should be in my record. And I'm like, yes, your record is a collection of 10,000 notes over the last 20 years. And I can't read all of them. You are the best source of information of sort of objective truth about your own medical record and your own medical journey, because the medical record is very difficult to decipher. And so we just need better tools that are designed now for this like data age where we actually need to transform just raw data into actually like actionable clinical information and insight, as you said.
Yeah, it's I don't know. I feel like I feel like it totally makes sense. Like now I'm like, why is it's kind of like it's already happening, right? Like it's like you said, somebody before transitioning the patient or giving, oh, I'm going to send you a note about it. Just where is it, right? So that's kind of what the information is missing, which is actually useful to the clinician, and that's the part you're tackling first, which makes me ask you my next question. So what is after that? What is which direction would you go from here on? Let's say this problem is solved and this is or at least your product is serving this. Now what's next from there?
Yeah. I think this is a question for a lot of the sort of like ambient scribe companies. Right? If you perfectly capture all of the data coming into the system, at least from a like encounter-based perspective, and then from our perspective, we've sort of like historically organized everything as well. Like, what do we do next? I think that's a big problem to start with. So if we can get that done, I'll be quite happy. But I think even what I think is surprising to patients and frustrating to clinicians is the degree to which even information available within my own health system is obscured by the volume of data, right? So I would be happy as a starting place if we can just solve for clinicians in small practices or large systems. We've solved the information management issue for just the data that they actually have direct access to, because that's actually a surprisingly difficult problem to fix. Obviously, this doesn't even touch on the interoperability piece. That's probably a reasonable place to go. Make sure that all of the records that I'm getting in that I have access to through HIEs or through faxes, or that get dropped off with the patient, here's 200 pages of text, or like, let's make sure we can capture all of that and organize all of that. If we can get through all of those various sort of related pieces, I would be thrilled, because those are, at this point, I think pretty large problems to solve. But I think from documentation flows most clinical work. So that's, reminders, orders, labs, meds, this kind of stuff. Patient-facing communication is a reasonable place to go, right? And then just filing away to the electronic health record, the like record of what happened, right? And not using the electronic health record as the review space, as the real workspace, because it's not designed as an active workspace. It's really designed as a filing cabinet, a very large filing cabinet. So if we can fix the like information management and the workspace issue, I think that's really great. And then you can send, you can do RPA and you can use sort of like computer control clicking to like actually put work into the electronic health record in like a headless server kind of a way. And you can control the health record. I think that's a cool place to go. But I think if we can push the industry even slightly more towards consideration of clinician workflows to decrease physician like administrative burden. And I don't just mean like the writing of the notes, but really the reviewing of the notes. If we can simplify that for our clients and make it so that the industry is sort of forced to go that way because it's just better for physician workflows, but also as a result, better for patient care, I would be very happy. If people are like, this has got to be the standard, then I think I would be thrilled if we could essentially redefine what standard workflows look like. That would be incredible.
Yeah, I think I totally agree in just it's a big problem to solve, first of all. So that's one. And the other thing is, like you mentioned, um, integrations, right? That's for sure. Like the more you have it integrated with uh, hopefully both ways, read write, but and that solves a lot of problem. And then you can trigger a whole bunch of workflows based on that, right? And that's going to be, it's funny. It reminded me of I was head of marketing for a patient communication software company, and later on that was acquired by an EHR company, but they still use it as an independent product. The company is still running as a independent product from in their product suite now. But now that I think back, I think something that came up with this discussion is kind of validating the few things. Is for me was like we had a very clear, like what we were trying to do was like improve patient communication, right? And the big part of that was like uh, when you call the office, you just play this phone tag between different people where you are. So we say like, well, instead of phone, we will create like a chat application where we will have everyone involved in patient's care, both administrative and clinical people, in one chat room. So there is no information loss. It's a complete is a record of the care coordination is there, and then visits are happening. And that was a big deal for us because but the point I want to make was like, the good thing about that was because the clinicians were explaining the problems in those, um, to patients. So they have to do it how you are saying, more problem oriented charting. So they were explaining like, this is the problem that we have and this is what it is. And then we built informations from our chat to the EHR to feed that information directly go in the charts. And that actually helped later on once we had those integrations. But I'm also thinking, well, it's so helpful for your patient workflows on the other end, right? Like now we could, like, once you have this whatever it's there, the next decision is based on that. And that decision, even before you go to the clinical side, there is first a communication workflow, and that needs to trigger that, right? So really, you kind of said and nailed, I would say, the sequence of things: integrations, then workflows, and then you go more on either on communication pieces or whatever needs to happen, either direct to patient, what will happen. And that's kind of how I would think the evolution of how you're expanding this. But like I said, it's a big problem to solve anyway in the front end. So that will be a winner itself. So that's a good part of it. Okay, cool. Yeah. So interesting. So again, let's switch the gear a bit to more kind of personal questions here. So you've been deeply involved in both academia and entrepreneurship. So how do you think we could redesign the physician training programs to better prepare doctors for what is now, I mean, tech and AI? It's AI is not going to stop. And so what do you think about that?
I think this is a question that more or less everyone in medicine is grappling with these days. Not too long ago, the sort of, I'll say, quote unquote, like best physicians were those who could come up with the broadest differential for a particular problem off the top of their head, because going to seek out the information was too time consuming, right? You needed to understand the various causes of hepatitis without going to look for them. And now medicine is so big, is so broad from an intellectual and literature perspective, that really I need to know how to go seek out and critically evaluate information quickly, and with a fairly skeptical eye. And so I think we need to teach physicians, clinicians really of all ilks, how to skeptically evaluate not only the information that's being presented to them, right? Here's this output from an AI large language model, but also to evaluate the models themselves. Like clinicians need to understand what tools are being used to give them information. And then they also need to be trained on how to skeptically evaluate, critically evaluate, like research and the literature. And I think that happens to an extent now, but I think the AI piece and the like large language model piece certainly doesn't happen yet. And I frankly, I don't know how the education is going to change to be more critical of and evaluating of these tools. But I think that's something we need to at least attempt to do, is to at least teach them how do these tools work. And I don't understand all of the math, like by any stretch of how a large language model works, but I understand, I think fairly intuitively at this point, kind of what it's doing and what the training data is that was used to build them and how that might affect the text that's output. And so teaching people how to understand those things, I think, is really important. And then just teaching people and figuring out how to evaluate clinicians in a way that isn't just dependent on them memorizing and regurgitating facts, right? The USMLE boards are just, how many facts can you cram into your brain about medicine? And can you regurgitate them in the appropriate context? And they've already essentially shown that large language models are great at this, right? And so what is my value as a physician if not to pass these boards and then be a physician, right? In that way. And in my mind, it's to like guide and teach patients, right? I have to be able to critically evaluate information that's presented to me in a way that is dependent on my medical training. And then I have to translate that into patient-facing and patient-friendly language in a way that I can guide and teach my patients towards what we think are good clinical decisions for themselves. And so I think physicians are going to have to switch from being just the content experts to being really the experts in guiding patients with more empathy and care towards patient perspective, because patients are going to be very empowered by these tools as well. And we need to readjust how we are doing that.
Yeah. I also feel like we're kind
Can
of
we pause for 1 second, Vivek?
yeah, sure.
Give me 1 second. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, 1 second. Yeah, I would say that on your point of training the physician, I think the most important thing is to get them into frame of mind of like each of you will have agents, right? And you will be kind of like not just, it's not important if you understand how those agents work, but what we really care about the output. But you should be okay with the idea of that now you can have a whole bunch of agents helping you in making sure you can go deeper in your diagnosis faster. And then of course the part of that you're saying how you educate patient is important. From there on, then translate that information to the patient in a way, but it almost gives you superpower at this point that that you can go broad and finding out anything in diagnosis side where it might have taken time in just like
For sure.
assessing the information, right? So that's kind of how I see.
Yeah, and I think what's been interesting to see is, right, these there's been a lot of research in the use of large language models for diagnosis, but also for patient communication, right? And I think there's this one that goes around, which is that communication generated by large language models is more empathetic, or at least viewed as more empathetic from the patient perspective than the clinician facing or the clinician generated text. And so, right, and large language models have gotten really good at doing, or agents have been built that are good at doing the history taking as well. And so if they're good at the history taking, they're good at the diagnosis. The treatment obviously is comes from there as well, or the like diagnostic workup and the communication. If the AIs are good at each piece of this, what do we do as clinicians? And I think, again, just being able to sort of like hold someone's hand and explain to them in a way and have a conversation with them about what it is that, I would do if it were me, or I would do if it were my parent. I think being able to be there and be that person, that human in the room, who has the expertise, the knowledge, and also, frankly, the human experience, which the AI just doesn't have and can never have. Having that human experience and making it more real for people, I think, is very helpful. And so we have to adjust how our training is to make it so that we're better at that. And that starts at not only medical school, but pre-medical school. How do we select people to go to medical school? Because right now it's based on test scores. It's based on how well you do on the MCAT. Like, is that what we need to be selecting for? Certainly there's a minimum threshold. There's a floor of like, you have to have done this well on this test because you need to understand the content, but it can't be the only thing. And judging those more humanistic aspects of people's capacity is much harder. It's not, I don't think it can really boil down to a number. So I think there's going to have to be, I think, a significant shift. I am not I am an educator to an extent. I work with residents. So that piece about like, supervising agents, I think a lot of attending physicians already do to an extent. We work with other clinicians who are in training at various stages, and we guide them and we sort of work with them and we get data from them, and we interpret that data with a critical lens, and then we go seek additional data when we feel like we need it. And when we don't feel like we need it, we send patients on their way. And so I think we're already attuned to these workflows. We work in these kinds of workflows as trainees. And so we have to maybe more explicitly say, you're doing this as a trainee now. You're going to learn as a trainee to be the like AI agent sort of kind of thing. And then as an attending, you're going to supervise physicians in training, but also AI agents who are going to help you take care of 10,000 patients instead of 2,000 patients. Maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, it's right now. It's all speculative, but we'll see how it turns out.
Who knows?
Yeah, yeah, who knows? But for sure, I mean, we will, like, one point I would probably highlight what you said is like very important, that how do we get people who are going into medicine, right? And that needs to probably change for sure, right? And that's a big puzzle here. We don't know yet, so we'll see how that will turn out, and we'll see. That's how it is right now. Right now, it's more like a customer adoption kind of tech. We'll see. We're going to of how it works, right? So we'll see. But certainly it will evolve. So great. All right. Great. Before we conclude today's conversation, my last segment is more like a rapid fire round. So we'll go over some fun questions and tell me, and then, as quickly you could answer. That's great. Okay. So what's one book you have read recently that changed your perspective?
So the books that I'm reading right now is not related to work really at all, or anything medical or technology related. It's the Temeraire series, which is about a dragon and like the Napoleon Wars. And it has shifted my perspective because I traditionally think of dragons as existing in like fantasy worlds. They exist in like Lord of the Rings. But in this series of books, dragons are just like dropped into our world. And so it has shifted my perspective because I think I'm like, oh, dragons are fantasy. But here they're presented as just like existing in the world that we have. And so I think I always try to keep an open perspective about like what is possible. And I think just breaking down these traditional silos of sort of what is fantasy literature versus what's historical fiction, right? Like these silos don't need to exist. And when you break down those silos, you can get like these fun, creative stories out of them. I think that's probably true in medicine and entrepreneurship and technology as well. Right? Trying to break through traditional silos of how information is managed even, right? Like if you just question the core concepts, you can come up with really interesting solutions for problems that have existed for decades.
Okay. And if you weren't a doctor or a founder, what alternative career would you have pursued?
Probably like an engineer. I really like details. I like solving tangible, fixable problems. And I think if I weren't doing what I was doing, I would probably be some kind of an engineer.
Okay. And I know that you have played squash pretty seriously. so, so what was your favorite memory for from playing squash at Wasser?
Yeah, so I would say I played squash. I'm not sure how serious it was. I was on the varsity team in college. It was great fun. And frankly, just being able to go to the national competition every year for college was just a lot of fun. Watching some of like the best squash players in the country, getting to play against some of them, getting absolutely trounced. That part wasn't necessarily fun, but just the experience of going and being with this group of people who were so passionate about something was a blast.
Wonderful. All right, cool. Thanks for sharing. And before we let you go, if our listeners wants to reach out to you, connect to you, where they can find you.
Yeah. So I'm on LinkedIn more than I would have thought previously. It's Jacob Kantrowitz. You can get me at my email. I'm at jacob@riverrecords.ai. And I'm on our website. Mostly I think LinkedIn is probably the easiest place to get me. I'm there every day, just spouting out the things that I like to talk about: information management and information chaos and documentation and things. So.
Perfect. So we'll put the links in the show notes wherever you get this. But once again, Jacob, this has been great. And the website is riverrecords.ai. Go check out River Records. And if you have any question, reach out to me, reach out to Jake, whosoever. And then we, of course, hope that you continue to make progress. We'll follow your LinkedIn feed. I actually follow it a bit. That's how I learned about you. And that's how I ended up getting you here. So, so that's certainly working, Jake. Keep doing it. Yeah. So that's good. Yeah. Again, thanks for your time. Much appreciated. This has been great.
Yeah. A lot of fun to be here. Thanks so much, Vivek. Really appreciate it.